So the reason I wanted to start with that is because that's a really important part of what we'll be talking about today. So today we're talking about forgiveness, reconciliation, and restoration of relationships, really. That's what we mean by restoring relationships. And this is an important topic, and I think as we go through it, you'll see some of the reasons why it's really important. But what you all noted was that the apology set a new tone, okay? Does anyone remember what Starr said in the debriefing about the apology? Remember what he said? He said, how do you sue an apology? Remember that? How do you sue an apology? He was totally taken aback by the fact that he got an apology, and then it just totally lowered his defenses. Yeah, so it really changed everything. So that's a key part, but it's not the only thing that's important here. Okay, so, all right, let's there we go. Okay, so we just did this first part, which was to share the learning outcomes, okay? And some of the other things we'll be looking at is how we address negative conflict spirals and wrongdoings and harm that comes from those kinds of things that can happen in a conflict. Okay? Very good. All right. So this person who's written an entire book on the subject says that that apologies can be very, very healing. So people who have been harmed, when they hear an apology and they're acknowledged for what actually happened to them, they see that person take responsibility. It can really lift a weight off people's shoulders. It makes people feel better when they receive an apology, so that when a person's been harmed, that can actually help with their healing. And the more serious the harm, of course, the more important this becomes. But you may have experienced that yourself, that when someone apologizes to you, it can make you feel a lot better about whatever it is that happened, right? When we get an apology, another thing that can happen is that we don't see that person as threatening anymore. So we see them taking responsibility for their actions, and that leads us to believe that they don't want to continue this behavior, that they actually are looking to try to change that, okay? And that can help us get unstuck when we're we're stuck with our anger. Does anyone ever experience that, where you're so mad about something that happened that it just keeps going? And it's like a short circuit in your brain. You just keep thinking about it. It doesn't get you anywhere, but you just can't stop thinking about it. It just goes on and on and on. So it can help to get us out of that cycle of being stuck like that. And then it allows us to offer forgiveness. So you're going to see some examples where this is offered in some really serious situations, and how that helps everybody that's involved in the situation, okay? Now, some of the things that happen when we do things that are problematic to other people is that we get debilitated by the remorse and the shame that we feel. So people who have committed crimes or even just done things that they really regret having done can feel really horrible themselves, okay? So that can just keep on eating away at us, and then it's hard to get over and to get past that, to be a better person, a person that doesn't make those kind of mistakes anymore. So when people will actually forgive us, it helps us to become free from some of that and be able to move on, and then we can rebuild our self-esteem, because that can just keep eating away at your self-esteem, and then it's hard to recover from those kinds of situations, okay? And when you give an apology, it has the ability to humble even the most arrogant people. So it's really, it's very powerful in that, okay? It can be really hard to admit that we're wrong. And I am the first to admit that I have a hard time admitting that I'm wrong. And so it takes a lot to actually be able to do that, and to realize it doesn't make you less of a person, but actually can make you a stronger person to be able to do that. Okay? Now, when we apologize, it also helps us to keep connections. So refusing to apologize, refusing to take responsibility can just put a wall, and that wall just stays there. It's like we can't get rid of that wall, right? It just stays there, okay? And then There's another little talked about benefit, which is that we might feel humiliated when we apologize because we're admitting things that we did that are a problem. But it reminds us that we don't want to repeat that behavior. So it helps to prevent the same things from happening over and over again. So you're taking responsibility, you apologize, and that way you're sort of putting people on notice to kind of keep you on track that you don't do this again, yeah, that you won't commit the same harm that you did before, okay? Another thing that apology does is that it helps generate empathy. So when you do something problematic or harmful to another person and you apologize and you take responsibility and you maybe talk about some of the things like, does anyone remember what Hacker said? Does anyone remember what he said about why he behaved the way he did? So I remember he used the word, I was freaking out, I freaked out, yeah. So when you apologize and take responsibility, the other person can actually empathize with what you are feeling and maybe empathize with some of the reasons why you did what you did, even if it was not a good choice that you made, yeah. And so it's found, there's research that shows that forgiving builds empathy, which helps to strengthen relationships, okay? And the apology increases the ability of people to forgive you when you do an apology, okay? Now, when you don't forgive, you're at risk for having what's called a state of embitterment, which can actually be pathological. So I think all of us are going to feel bitter about things that happen to us, negative things that happen to us, and that's totally normal, and it's okay. But if it gets to a extreme, then it can become a syndrome that's been identified, okay? So what happens when we're mad about something that happened or still feeling hurt and affected by it is that we keep reliving it. Every time we replay the movie in our heads of what happened, we keep reliving it. And even when we tell the story to someone else, you not only are talking about the events, but what happens as you talk about the events is that the feelings start coming back. And have you ever noticed that someone's gone through something really traumatic and they talk about it and they start crying? Like it's happening right then and there. So you actually re-experience the feelings when you keep reliving it, whether you do it in your head, like the way we imagine things, like we have a movie playing in our head, or when we tell the story to someone else, we actually start to experience those same feelings, and so we continue the suffering. When we keep the story going, we continue the suffering that happened, okay? So with people who get really stuck, this goes on and on, and so we keep on being affected. So whatever harm that somebody may have caused to us, it's like we're empowering them to keep on harming us, because it keeps on going in our heads and through our storytelling, right?
Just to approach it from like an antagonist point of view, is that like being able to vent those emotions sometimes helps as well?
Yes.
Do they touch on that, or?
Right. It is, I mean, venting and releasing emotions is not a bad thing. I'm talking about when people get stuck. So, and it just keeps on going. In fact, when you've gone through a trauma, one of the things that can help you heal is to actually tell a story about what happened and get in touch with your feelings and cry or scream or whatever. Those kinds of things are helpful in the healing process. What I'm talking about is when people can't let go and they stay stuck there. Yeah, then they get stuck there. So there's actually, and so when that happens, when you keep on feeling stuck and you can't let go of that anger, that harm that happened to you or whatever that person did, their behavior continues to affect you long past the time where it's over now, but you're still feeling hurt by it. So it's like you're giving power to the perpetrator to keep on causing you harm by not being able to let go. When it's really severe and it's identified as a syndrome, it's called post-traumatic embitterment disorder. So it's different than post-traumatic stress disorder because it's not simply reliving the experience. Like post-traumatic stress is like you keep going over and over and keep reliving the experience, but you're actually having revenge fantasies, and other kinds of negative things that keep you stuck, okay? And it can motivate people to take revenge, and that's how we have communities that are stuck in cycles of violence against each other that just keeps going and going because people get stuck like this, and nobody wants to take the first step to change the cycle, okay? So these are the actual symptoms of post-traumatic bitterness disorder, and I put them on the slide just so you can see them. You don't have to memorize this, it's not going to be on the test, okay? But just so you know, for those of you that are interested to see what are the specifics of it, and maybe guard against it, or if you've been harmed by somebody and you keep on being stuck on it, and to know that, wow, this is something that's not healthy for me, okay? Now, when you have communities where there's been harm and they keep on inflicting violence on each other, okay, there is this thing that's called the cycle of violence, and Skilla, Ellsworthy, and Paul Rogers wrote a book on the war on terrorism, which is actually looking at how people keep on engaging in acts of violence against each other, and they look at how do you break that cycle. So you have some kind of atrocity. So take, for example, in Ireland, the IRA bombs something that's of the British, whether it was in Northern Ireland or if it was in London, they bombed something, so then, the people that are in the opposition, they get angry and they do an act of violence against the IRA to get back, and then it just continues the cycle. So you have the atrocity, then people feel the shock and the terror of that, the fear and the pain and the grief, the anger, then when it turns to bitterness, then they start thinking of acts of revenge, and then there's a retaliation, and then that other group then also commits an act of atrocity against them, right? And then you just keep, and this is how communities that have been in violence for years, Israel and Palestine, in Ireland, Northern Ireland versus the Irish Republic, and other places in Africa, and even in this country, look at gangs and how they keep on attacking and killing each other. You have gang shootings. There's the gang shootings, and there's the act of revenge, and then you don't even know where it started. They're just killing each other. Yeah. So right here in our own country, we have this happening. It's not just in other places. Okay. Now this I have here to show you. Oh no. Okay, so check this out here.